In an age where every royal movement is scrutinized through telephoto lenses and dissected across social media platforms, one rainy afternoon would prove that even the most carefully orchestrated public appearances can reveal unexpected truths about the people behind the crowns. What started as routine coverage of a royal engagement would become a defining moment that showed the world a side of Catherine they had never seen before, raw, determined, and utterly human. This is the story of how a simple drive through the rain became a window into the soul of a future queen, and how sometimes the most powerful moments happen not when the cameras are invited, but when they catch what was never meant to be seen. The morning of October 15th dawned with an ominous grey sky that seemed to mirror the tension brewing within the walls of Kensington Palace. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, stood before her bedroom window, watching the clouds gather like an army preparing for battle. She had always found comfort in observing the weather, a habit formed during her childhood in Berkshire, where her mother would point out the different cloud formations and predict the day's weather with surprising accuracy. Today, however, the approaching storm felt like more than just meteorological phenomenon. It felt personal. Her private secretary, James Morrison, had been fielding calls since dawn about the day's engagement at Windsor Castle. The annual charity gala for the Children's Hospital Foundation was Catherine's most important patronage event of the year, something she had been planning for months. The guest list included prominent philanthropists, medical professionals, and families whose children had benefited from the foundation's work. More importantly, it represented Catherine's first major solo engagement since returning from her summer break, a period that had been marked by intense media speculation about her role within the royal family and her relationship with various family members. The weather forecast had been calling for light showers, but as Catherine watched from her window, the clouds seemed to be darkening by the minute. She could already imagine the headlines if the event had to be cancelled or postponed. Princess Catherine's event washed out, or worse, royal retreat Catherine cancels amid family drama. The British press had been particularly relentless lately, analysing every gesture, every facial expression, every choice of clothing for hidden meanings and signs of discord within the royal family. Maria Santos, Catherine's longtime dresser and confidant, entered the room carrying a garment bag. Maria had been with Catherine since her engagement to Prince William, witnessing the transformation from a relatively unknown university graduate to one of the most photographed women in the world. She had an intuitive understanding of Catherine's moods and could read the subtle signs of stress that others might miss. The way Catherine's shoulders tensed when she was worried, how she would unconsciously twist her engagement ring when deep in thought, the slight tremor in her voice when she was trying to maintain composure under pressure. The midnight blue Amelia Wickstead or the forest green Alexander McQueen? Maria asked, though she already knew Catherine's preference. Throughout their years together, they had developed an almost telepathic communication, especially when it came to wardrobe decisions. Each outfit was carefully chosen not just for its aesthetic appeal, but for the message it would send. Colors, designers, accessories, everything was a form of diplomatic communication in the world of royal engagements. The McQueen, Catherine replied without hesitation. It photographs well in low light, and something tells me we're going to need all the help we can get today. She turned from the window, and Maria noticed the determination in her eyes. It was a look she had seen before, usually preceding Catherine's most successful and memorable public appearances. There was something about adversity that seemed to bring out the best in the Princess of Wales, a quality that had endeared her to the public, but also made her a formidable presence within the royal family. As Maria began laying out the outfit, Catherine's phone buzzed with a text message from her husband, William, who was currently in Scotland on official duties. The message was brief but supportive. Weather looking rough. Drive carefully if you're going solo. Love you. The phrase going solo carried weight beyond its surface meaning. Traditionally, royal engagements of this magnitude would involve a full security detail, including armed officers, a lead car, and a following car. However, Catherine had specifically requested a minimal security presence for this event, wanting to demonstrate her confidence and independence, while also reducing the imposing nature of a full royal motorcade at what was, essentially, a charity function focused on children's welfare. The decision to drive herself had been met with resistance from the Royal Protection Squad. Detective Inspector Sarah Williams, Catherine's primary protection officer, had spent considerable time outlining the potential security risks. However, Catherine had remained firm in her decision. She understood the risks but felt that the symbolic value of arriving under her own power especially given the recent media narrative about her supposed fragility and dependence on royal protocol, was worth the calculated risk. Catherine's morning routine was typically precise and calming. She started with 20 minutes of meditation, a practice she had developed during the challenging early years of her marriage when the constant media attention had sometimes felt overwhelming. This was followed by a light breakfast, usually Greek yogurt with honey and fresh berries. While reviewing her briefing notes for the day's engagement, today's briefing was particularly thick, containing detailed information about each family that would be attending, medical updates on the children involved, and talking points for her speech. The Children's Hospital Foundation held special significance for Catherine. During her first year as a working royal, she had made an unannounced visit to the paediatric ward of St Mary's Hospital in London. What was meant to be a brief photo opportunity had turned into a 3-hour visit, during which Catherine had sat with families, read stories to children, and even helped feed a particularly fussy infant whose parents were exhausted from days of hospital vigil. The photographs from that day, showing Catherine in a simple cardigan and jeans sitting cross-legged on a hospital floor while reading to a group of children, had become some of the most beloved images of her early royal career. The foundation had grown from that initial connection, evolving into one of Catherine's most hands-on patronages. Unlike some royal charitable associations that involved primarily ceremonial appearances, Catherine was actively involved in the foundation's strategic planning, fundraising initiatives, and program development. She had insisted on visiting families in their homes, attending medical conferences to better understand pediatric care challenges, and even participating in training sessions with hospital staff to better comprehend the emotional and practical challenges faced by families dealing with serious childhood illnesses. As Catherine prepared for the day ahead, she couldn't shake the feeling that this event would be more significant than anyone anticipated. The morning news had been dominated by stories about rising healthcare costs, government funding cuts to children's services, and public debate about the role of charitable organizations in filling gaps left by reduced public spending. Her speech today would need to address these concerns while avoiding any appearance of political commentary, a delicate balance that required careful consideration of every word. The weather outside continued to deteriorate. What had begun as light clouds was now developing into a more serious weather system. Catherine could see the trees in Kensington Gardens beginning to sway as the wind picked up, and the first fat raindrops were beginning to streak down her window. She thought about calling James to discuss contingency plans, but something inside her rebelled against the idea. Too often, it seemed, royal events were modified, postponed, or cancelled due to circumstances beyond anyone's control. Today felt different. Today felt like a moment when showing up despite the challenges would send a more powerful message than any carefully crafted speech or perfectly coordinated photo opportunity. Her decision was influenced by a conversation she had the previous evening with her father-in-law, King Charles. He had called to wish her well with the engagement and had shared a story from his own early years as Prince of Wales, when he had insisted on attending a community event despite severe flooding in the area. Sometimes, he had told her, the most important thing is simply showing up when people expect you won't. It's in those moments that you demonstrate what the monarchy really means to people. Catherine finished her breakfast and reviewed her speech notes one final time. The speech was intended to be uplifting and inspiring, focusing on the resilience of the family supported by the foundation and the dedication of the medical professionals who cared for their children. She had worked on it for weeks, incorporating personal anecdotes from her hospital visits and statistical information about the foundation's impact. However, looking at the deteriorating weather outside, she wondered if her prepared remarks would need to be modified to acknowledge the challenging circumstances under which everyone would be gathering. The outfit Maria had selected was both practical and elegant. The forest green McQueen dress was made from a wool crepe that would maintain its structure even in humid conditions, and the colour would photograph beautifully against the historic backdrop of Windsor Castle. Catherine had paired it with nude tights, black suede pumps with a modest heel that would be stable on wet surfaces, and a matching black clutch that contained her speech notes, breath mints, and a small umbrella, her one concession to the weather. Her jewellery was kept minimal. Her engagement ring, her wedding band, and a pair of small pearl earrings that had belonged to William's grandmother, the Queen Mother. Each piece had been chosen for its significance rather than its monetary value. The pearls, in particular, held special meaning. They had been a wedding gift from the late Queen Elizabeth II, who had worn them during her own challenging early years as a working royal. Catherine often wore them to events where she needed to feel particularly connected to the institution she represented. As she prepared to leave Kensington Palace, Catherine took one last look in the mirror. The woman looking back at her had evolved considerably from the shy university student who had first captured Prince William's attention. Her features had matured, gaining a confidence and authority that came from years of public service and personal growth. Her eyes, however, still held the warmth and genuine interest in others that had made her such an effective royal representative. The decision to drive herself to Windsor Castle was not made lightly. Under normal circumstances, such an important engagement would involve coordination between multiple security agencies, predetermined routes with backup options, and communication protocols with local police forces. However, Catherine had specifically requested the freedom to make real-time decisions about her travel, particularly given the uncertain weather conditions. She wanted the flexibility to take alternate routes if necessary, to stop if she encountered anyone in need of assistance due to the storm, and to demonstrate a level of personal agency that had sometimes been obscured by royal protocol. Detective Inspector Williams was already waiting by Catherine's car, a dark blue Range Rover that had been modified with discreet security features but maintained the appearance of a civilian vehicle. Williams had worked with the royal family for over 15 years and had developed a reputation for being both highly professional and remarkably adaptable. She understood Catherine's desire for independence while never compromising on security considerations. The weather service is now calling for heavy rain throughout the afternoon, Williams reported as Catherine approached the vehicle. The alternate routes to Windsor are all clear, but we may encounter some localized flooding on the more direct paths. I've been in contact with Thames Valley Police and they're monitoring the situation, Catherine nodded, appreciating Williams' thorough preparation while also noting that the detective had not suggested postponing or modifying the engagement. This was one of the qualities Catherine most valued in her protection team. They found ways to accommodate her decisions rather than automatically defaulting to the most restrictive security protocols. As they prepared to depart Kensington Palace, Catherine felt a familiar mixture of anticipation and nervous energy that always preceded significant public appearances. However, today there was an additional element, a sense that this journey through the storm would prove to be more than just transportation from one location to another. As the first heavy raindrops began to fall on the windshield, Catherine settled into the driver's seat, adjusted her mirrors, and prepared to navigate whatever challenges the day might bring. The first few miles from Kensington Palace proceeded smoothly despite the increasingly heavy rainfall. Catherine had always found driving therapeutic, a rare opportunity for solitude and reflection, in a life that was otherwise meticulously scheduled and constantly observed. The Range Rover's heated seats provided comfort against the October chill, while the rhythmic sound of rain against the windows created an almost meditative atmosphere. Detective Inspector Williams maintained professional silence in the passenger seat, occasionally speaking into her radio to coordinate with various security checkpoints along their route. As they merged onto the M4 motorway heading west toward Windsor, the storm intensified dramatically. What had been steady rainfall suddenly transformed into a torrential downpour that reduced visibility to mere yards ahead of the vehicle. Catherine adjusted her grip on the steering wheel and reduced their speed accordingly, her years of advanced driving training, a requirement for all working royals, proving invaluable in the challenging conditions. She had completed specialized courses in defensive driving, wet weather navigation, and emergency maneuvering, skills that had initially seemed excessive but now felt absolutely essential. The motorway was becoming increasingly dangerous as other drivers struggled with the conditions. Catherine observed several vehicles pulled over on the shoulder with their hazard lights flashing, their occupants apparently waiting for the worst of the storm to pass. She noticed a small family standing beside their broken-down car, huddled under an inadequate umbrella while trying to shield two young children from the driving rain. Without hesitation, she began to move toward the left lane, intending to stop and offer assistance. "Ma'am," Detective Inspector Williams said quietly, "I understand your instinct, but we cannot compromise your security or the timeline for today's engagement." Her voice carried both respect and firmness, the tone of someone who had navigated these situations many times before. "I can request that local traffic police check on that family." Catherine paused, her hands tightening on the steering wheel. This was one of the ongoing tensions in her royal role, the constant balance between her natural inclination to help others directly and the security and protocol requirements that often prevented such spontaneous acts of kindness. She had learned to work within these constraints, finding alternative ways to make a difference. But moments like these still frustrated her deeply. "Please do call it in," she replied, glancing in her rearview mirror at the family growing smaller in the distance, "and see if we can have someone from our office follow up to ensure they received proper assistance." This compromise solution reflected the approach Catherine had developed over the years. When she couldn't provide direct help, she ensured that appropriate help was provided through other channels. The rain continued to pound against the windshield with such intensity that the wipers, even at their highest setting, seemed inadequate for the task. Catherine found herself leaning slightly forward, straining to see the road markers and other vehicles through the wall of water. The normally 40-minute drive to Windsor Castle was clearly going to take much longer, which meant arriving later than planned for the pre-event reception with Foundation board members and key donors. James Morrison, her private secretary, had built buffer time into the day's schedule specifically to account for such contingencies, but Catherine knew that significant delays could create cascading problems throughout the afternoon. The families attending the event had made special arrangements to be there, some travelling considerable distances despite their children's medical conditions. The medical professionals participating in the panel discussion had adjusted their hospital schedules. The media representatives covering the event had their own deadlines and commitments. As they passed through the Berkshire countryside, Catherine noticed how the familiar landscape had been transformed by the storm. Fields that were normally pastoral and peaceful now resembled temporary lakes, with water pooling in low-lying areas and overwhelmed drainage systems creating impromptu rivers along the roadside. The autumn trees, heavy with rain-soaked leaves, swayed dramatically in the wind, occasionally dropping branches onto the road that forced Catherine to navigate carefully around the obstacles. Despite the challenging conditions, Catherine found herself thinking about the broader significance of this particular engagement. The Children's Hospital Foundation represented more than just another charitable commitment in her portfolio of royal duties. It had become a genuine passion project that allowed her to engage with issues she cared deeply about while also demonstrating the monarchy's continued relevance in addressing contemporary social challenges. Her involvement with the foundation had evolved considerably since that first impromptu hospital visit years earlier. What had begun as ceremonial appearances had developed into substantive engagement with policy discussions, funding strategies, and program development. Catherine had insisted on understanding not just the emotional stories of individual families, but also the systemic challenges facing pediatric healthcare in the United Kingdom. She had attended medical conferences, participated in training sessions with healthcare professionals, and even spent time in hospital emergency departments to better comprehend the pressures facing medical staff. This deeper level of engagement had not gone unnoticed by the media or the public. Catherine's speeches on healthcare topics were now covered by medical journals as well as traditional royal correspondence. Her foundation work was being studied by other charitable organisations as a model for effective royal patronage in the modern era. Most importantly, the families and medical professionals she worked with had come to view her not as a ceremonial figurehead, but as a genuine advocate for their cause. The storm seemed to be following them as they travelled west, with lightning beginning to illuminate the dark afternoon sky and thunder rolling across the countryside. Catherine had to admit that the conditions were becoming genuinely concerning. She had driven in challenging weather before, but this storm had an intensity that felt almost supernatural. The radio was broadcasting warnings about localized flooding and advising against non-essential travel, which made her decision to continue toward Windsor feel both more significant and more risky. Detective Inspector Williams was in constant communication with various security checkpoints, traffic management centres, and the Windsor Castle security team. Catherine could hear fragments of these conversations. Updates on road conditions, assessments of crowd control challenges given the weather, and contingency planning discussions about potential modifications to the event schedule. The security apparatus surrounding royal engagements was remarkably complex, involving coordination between multiple agencies and constant real-time adjustments based on evolving circumstances. As they approached the exit for Windsor, Catherine realised that this journey was becoming something more than transportation between 2 points. The decision to continue despite the storm, to maintain her commitment to the families and medical professionals who were counting on her presence, felt like a defining moment in her development as a royal representative. She had learned over the years that leadership was often demonstrated not through grand gestures or carefully orchestrated public moments, but through quiet persistence in the face of ordinary challenges. The local roads leading to Windsor Castle were even more challenging than the motorway had been. Standing water had accumulated in several low-lying areas, forcing Catherine to navigate carefully around potential hazards while maintaining enough speed to avoid getting stuck. She could see other vehicles that had not been as fortunate, cars stranded in deeper water with their owners standing helplessly beside them, waiting for emergency assistance. Catherine's phone, connected to the car's communication system, began receiving updates from various members of her team. James Morrison reported that approximately 70% of the expected attendees had confirmed they were still planning to attend despite the weather, though some families with particularly vulnerable children had understandably decided to stay home. The Foundation's board members were all confirmed to be attending, having travelled from various parts of the country specifically for this event. Dr. Elizabeth Harper, the Foundation's medical director and one of Catherine's closest collaborators, sent a message indicating that she was already at Windsor Castle and that the venue team was making excellent preparations for managing the weather-related challenges. The castle's event staff had extensive experience with outdoor elements affecting indoor events, a necessity given the building's age and the unpredictable British climate. More importantly, Dr. Harper reported that several families had specifically mentioned how meaningful it was that the event was proceeding despite the difficult conditions. For families dealing with serious childhood illnesses, the ability to maintain normal activities and commitments despite challenging circumstances resonated deeply with their daily experiences. They understood better than most that life rarely proceeded according to plan, and that showing up despite difficulties was often what mattered most. As Windsor Castle began to come into view through the rain and mist, Catherine felt a surge of emotion that surprised her with its intensity. The ancient fortress, with its iconic round tower emerging from the storm clouds like something from a fairy tale, had always held special significance for the royal family. It was where she and William had lived during the early years of their marriage, where they had celebrated countless family occasions, and where she had first truly begun to understand the weight and responsibility of her royal role. Today, however, the castle seemed to represent something additional. A destination reached through determination and commitment, a goal achieved despite obstacles that might have provided reasonable justification for abandonment. The symbolism was not lost on Catherine as she navigated the final approach road, with Detective Inspector Williams providing quiet guidance about the modified security arrangements that had been implemented to account for the weather conditions. The media presence at Windsor Castle was smaller than usual, with only the most dedicated photographers and reporters braving the storm to cover the event. Catherine could see them positioned under makeshift shelters near the main entrance, their equipment protected by plastic coverings as they prepared to document her arrival. She wondered what story they would tell about this day, whether they would focus on the challenging conditions, the reduced attendance, or the determination to proceed despite the obstacles. As she pulled into the designated parking area, Catherine took a moment to compose herself before stepping out into the storm. Her hair and makeup, carefully prepared that morning by her styling team, would undoubtedly be affected by the wind and rain during the short walk to the castle entrance. Her carefully selected outfit would be tested by conditions that no fashion designer could have anticipated. But somehow, these practical concerns seemed less important than they might have on other occasions. The decision to drive herself to Windsor Castle through the storm had become more than a transportation choice. It had evolved into a personal statement about commitment, resilience, and the importance of showing up when others were counting on you. As Catherine prepared to step out of the vehicle and run through the rain toward her destiny, she understood that this moment would be remembered not for its perfect execution, but for its authentic demonstration of dedication to duty despite challenging circumstances. The storm continued to rage around Windsor Castle, but inside the ancient walls, something important was about to begin. An event that would be made more meaningful, precisely because everyone involved had chosen to be there, despite having every reasonable excuse to stay away. Catherine gathered her courage, checked that her speech notes were secure in their waterproof folder, and prepared to face both the storm and her responsibilities with equal determination. The moment Catherine stepped out of the Range Rover, the full force of the storm hit her with surprising intensity. The wind, which had seemed manageable from inside the vehicle, immediately caught her carefully styled hair and whipped it across her face. The rain, driven sideways by powerful gusts, soaked through her coat within seconds despite the short distance to the castle entrance. Detective Inspector Williams appeared beside her almost instantly, umbrella in hand, though the wind made it largely ineffective against the horizontal assault of water and debris. What struck Catherine most profoundly in those chaotic few seconds was not the physical discomfort of being drenched, but the realization that she was experiencing something genuine and uncontrolled in a life that was typically managed down to the smallest detail. Her usual arrival protocol involved stepping from a vehicle directly onto red carpets or protected walkways, with every element choreographed to ensure she appeared composed and dignified. Today, however, she was simply another human being struggling against the elements, and there was something liberating about that reality. The photographers positioned near the entrance captured the entire sequence. Catherine's determined expression as she faced the storm, her careful navigation across the wet courtyard stones, and her obvious relief as she reached the shelter of the ancient castle walls. These images would later become some of the most powerful photographs of her royal career, showing not a perfectly coiffed princess arriving in ideal conditions, but a committed woman who had chosen duty over comfort and presence over convenience. Inside Windsor Castle, The atmosphere was dramatically different from the chaos outside. The thick medieval walls provided complete protection from the storm, creating an almost otherworldly sense of calm and security. The event staff had transformed one of the castle's historic reception rooms into an elegant space appropriate for the Foundation's gathering, with warm lighting that contrasted beautifully with the dark storm clouds visible through the tall windows. Catherine's arrival had been anticipated by the Foundation team, who immediately provided her with towels and offered her the opportunity to refresh her appearance before meeting with the early arriving guests. However, as she looked in the mirror of the small preparation room, Catherine made an interesting decision. Instead of completely restoring her carefully crafted appearance, she chose to make only minimal adjustments. Her hair remained slightly disheveled from the wind, and there were still faint traces of rainwater on her clothing. She wanted the families and medical professionals at the event to see that she had made the same choice they had, to show up despite the difficult conditions. Dr. Elizabeth Harper was waiting when Catherine emerged from the preparation room. Dr. Harper had been working with the Foundation for over a decade and had become not only a professional colleague, but also a trusted friend who could speak frankly about both the successes and challenges of their shared mission. She was one of the few people in Catherine's professional circle who treated her primarily as a partner in important work rather than as a royal figure requiring careful deference. Quite an entrance, Dr. Harper said with a smile that mixed admiration with concern. Half our board members are texting their spouses to report that the Princess of Wales just arrived looking like she swam here from London. The other half are asking if we should have postponed the entire event. Catherine laughed, feeling some of the tension from the difficult journey beginning to dissipate. And what did you tell them?
I told them that if you were willing to drive through a storm to be here, it probably means this matters more than we initially realized.
Harper's expression became more serious. Actually, several of the families specifically mentioned how meaningful it is that you came despite the conditions. The Hendersons, you remember little Emma who had the heart surgery last spring, her mother said it reminded her of all the times they had to travel to the hospital in terrible weather because medical emergencies don't wait for convenient timing. This observation resonated deeply with Catherine. Throughout her work with the Foundation, she had been continually struck by the resilience and determination of the families dealing with serious childhood illnesses. They navigated challenges that would overwhelm most people: financial pressures, logistical complications, emotional exhaustion, medical uncertainties, while maintaining focus on what truly mattered: their children's well-being. Her decision to continue through the storm suddenly felt less like an individual choice and more like solidarity with the daily realities faced by the families she was there to support. The early reception was smaller than originally planned due to the weather, but the attendees who had made it to Windsor Castle seemed energized rather than dampened by the challenging conditions. There was a sense of shared accomplishment in having overcome the obstacles, and conversations were more relaxed and authentic than was sometimes the case at formal royal events. Catherine found herself engaged in substantive discussions about healthcare policy, funding challenges, and innovative treatment approaches, rather than the polite pleasantries that often dominated such gatherings. Margaret Chen, whose 8-year-old son David was receiving experimental treatment for a rare genetic condition, approached Catherine during the reception with a level of directness that was refreshing.
Your Royal Highness, I have to say that seeing you arrive in that downpour, looking like the rest of us when we've been caught in bad weather, made you seem more real than I expected.
My son has been asking if princesses ever get their hair messy or have to run through the rain like regular people. Catherine knelt down to David's eye level, her still damp hair catching the light from the castle's chandeliers. Would you like to know a secret, David? Princesses get their hair messy all the time, especially when they're doing important things, like coming to meet brave children like you. And sometimes the most important adventures happen when the weather is terrible and everything seems difficult. David's eyes widened with delight, and he reached out to touch Catherine's slightly disheveled hair. It's really messy, he announced with the brutal honesty that only children possess. His mother looked mortified, but Catherine burst into genuine laughter. It absolutely is messy, she agreed. But I think messy hair is a small price to pay for being here with all of you today. This interaction was observed by several other families, and Catherine noticed a subtle shift in the atmosphere of the reception. The formal distance that sometimes characterized royal engagements seemed to dissolve, replaced by more natural and meaningful connections. Parents began sharing more personal stories about their experiences. Medical professionals spoke more candidly about the challenges they faced, and board members discussed funding priorities with greater urgency and specificity. Dr. Michael Roberts, the head of pediatric surgery at Great Ormond Street Hospital, joined Catherine's conversation with the Chen family. Dr. Roberts had been working with critically ill children for over 20 years, and had developed a reputation for both exceptional medical skill and remarkable bedside manner. He had been instrumental in developing several of the Foundation's most successful programs and had become an informal advisor to Catherine on medical policy issues. "Your Royal Highness, Doctor," Robert said, "I've been thinking about your arrival this afternoon, and I realize it illustrates something important about the work we do. In pediatric medicine, we can't wait for perfect conditions. Children don't get sick according to convenient schedules, families don't have medical emergencies only during normal business hours, and healing doesn't happen only when circumstances are ideal. Sometimes the most important care happens in the middle of storms, both literal and metaphorical." Catherine was struck by this observation. Throughout her royal training, she had been taught to appreciate the symbolic dimensions of public appearances, but Dr. Forth Roberts was suggesting that today's symbolism was even more profound than she had initially realized. Her journey through the storm wasn't just a demonstration of personal commitment, it was a metaphor for the daily reality of pediatric healthcare, where dedicated professionals and determined families navigate crises regardless of external circumstances. As the reception continued, Catherine noticed that the storm outside was beginning to intensify even further. Lightning was now visible through the tall windows, and the thunder was becoming loud enough to occasionally interrupt conversations. Several guests expressed concern about their ability to travel safely after the event, and Catherine began to worry about the families who would need to make difficult journeys home, possibly in even worse conditions than she had faced during her trip to Windsor. James Morrison approached with updates on the afternoon schedule. "Ma'am, we're receiving reports of localized flooding on several of the routes that attendees will need to use for their return journeys. The Foundation Board is discussing whether to modify the program to allow earlier departures, and the castle staff is prepared to provide shelter overnight if necessary for any families who cannot travel safely." Catherine appreciated the thorough contingency planning, but she also realized that these logistics were creating an opportunity for something more meaningful than the originally planned program. Instead of rushing through a formal presentation to accommodate weather concerns, they could create a more intimate and extended engagement that would allow for deeper connections and more substantive discussions.
What if we modified our approach entirely? Catherine suggested to James and Dr.
Harper, instead of the formal presentation followed by brief individual meetings, what if we created a more relaxed gathering where families and medical professionals could share experiences and ideas with each other? The storm has already made this day unique. Perhaps we should embrace that rather than fighting against it. Dr. Harper's eyes lit up with enthusiasm. That's exactly the kind of thinking that makes you such an effective patron. Some of our most productive discussions happen during informal moments rather than structured presentations. And these families rarely get opportunities to connect with each other outside of hospital waiting rooms. The decision to restructure the event proved to be inspired. Instead of Catherine delivering a formal speech to a seated audience, the afternoon evolved into a series of small group discussions where families, medical professionals, board members, and Catherine herself could share experiences, challenges, and ideas in a more natural setting. The storm raging outside created a sense of intimacy and shared experience that enhanced rather than detracted from the connections being formed. Catherine found herself seated on the floor with a group of children, listening to their perspectives on hospital experiences, while their parents engaged in passionate discussions with medical professionals about research priorities and treatment accessibility. The artificial barriers that sometimes existed between different constituencies within the Foundation's community began to dissolve, replaced by recognition of shared commitment to improving outcomes for sick children. As afternoon moved toward evening, the storm showed no signs of abating. If anything, the conditions outside were becoming more severe, with reports of significant flooding in several areas and warnings against non-essential travel. However, inside Windsor Castle, something remarkable was happening. What had begun as a modified schedule to accommodate weather challenges had evolved into the most substantive and meaningful foundation gathering Catherine could remember. The conversations were addressing fundamental questions about the future of pediatric healthcare, the role of charitable organizations in supporting medical research, and the ways that families and medical professionals could work together more effectively. Catherine realized that her decision to drive through the storm had inadvertently created the conditions for exactly the kind of deep, meaningful engagement that she had always hoped to achieve through her foundation work. As the day continued, Catherine understood that this storm-interrupted gathering would be remembered not as a logistical challenge successfully managed, but as a transformative moment when authentic human connections transcended formal protocols and created something genuinely valuable for everyone involved. As evening approached and the storm continued its relentless assault on Windsor Castle, something unprecedented began to unfold. The modified gathering had evolved beyond anyone's expectations, creating an environment where genuine breakthrough moments were occurring with remarkable frequency. Catherine found herself witnessing conversations between families and medical professionals that were producing new insights, collaborative solutions, and innovative approaches to challenges that had previously seemed insurmountable. In one corner of the historic reception room, she observed Dr. Patricia Williams, a renowned pediatric oncologist, engaged in deep conversation with Sarah and Mark Thompson, whose 6-year-old daughter Lucy was undergoing treatment for leukemia. What had begun as a routine introduction had evolved into a detailed discussion about integrating family wellness programs into treatment protocols. Dr. Williams was taking extensive notes as Sarah described the emotional and practical support systems that had made the biggest difference in their family's journey through Lucy's illness. "We always focus on treating the child," Dr. Williams was saying, "but listening to your experience makes me realize we're missing opportunities to support the entire family system in ways that could actually improve medical outcomes. The stress reduction alone could have measurable effects on treatment efficacy." Catherine was struck by the realization that the informal setting created by the storm emergency was facilitating exactly the kind of cross-pollination of ideas that the Foundation had always hoped to achieve, but had struggled to accomplish through more traditional formal events. The usual hierarchies and professional boundaries were being temporarily suspended, allowing for more honest and productive exchanges of information and perspective. Meanwhile, near the tall windows where the storm's intensity remained visible despite the gathering darkness, another remarkable conversation was taking place. Thomas Harrison, whose 12-year-old son James had been born with spina bifida, was sharing detailed insights with Dr. Elizabeth Harper about the long-term transition challenges faced by families as children with chronic conditions move toward adulthood. Thomas worked as a software engineer and had developed several digital tools to help manage James's complex medical schedule and coordinate between multiple specialists. "The technology exists to solve most of the coordination and communication problems," Thomas was explaining while showing Dr. Harper his smartphone apps. "But the medical system hasn't figured out how to integrate these solutions effectively. Parents end up becoming project managers for incredibly complex medical cases without any formal training or institutional support." Dr. Harper was fascinated by Thomas's technological solutions and began discussing how similar tools could be developed and implemented more broadly. "This is exactly the kind of innovation that could transform pediatric care," she said. "But you're right that we need systematic approaches rather than leaving individual families to develop their own solutions in isolation." Catherine had been observing these conversations while moving between different groups, but she was also engaged in her own remarkable discussion with Amanda Foster, a pediatric nurse who had been working in children's hospitals for over 15 years. Amanda had initially been somewhat nervous about attending the event, feeling that her perspective as a frontline healthcare worker might not be valued in a gathering that included prominent medical researchers and hospital administrators. However, the informal atmosphere had encouraged Amanda to share her observations about the daily realities of pediatric care, and Catherine found herself learning more about healthcare delivery challenges than she had through months of formal briefings and official reports. Amanda's insights were both deeply practical and profoundly moving, covering everything from the emotional impact of caring for critically ill children to the resource constraints that affected treatment quality. "The families see us as the face of the medical system," Amanda was explaining. "We're often the ones delivering difficult news, explaining complex procedures, and providing comfort during the worst moments of their lives. But we're also dealing with understaffing, funding cuts, and equipment shortages that make it increasingly difficult to provide the level of care we know these children deserve." Catherine realized that Amanda's perspective represented a crucial piece of the healthcare puzzle that was often missing from policy discussions. The gap between medical research breakthroughs and actual patient care delivery was often bridged by dedicated nursing professionals whose insights were rarely incorporated into strategic planning processes. As the evening progressed, the storm outside reached what seemed to be its peak intensity. The wind was now howling audibly, even through the thick castle walls, and the lightning was creating almost continuous illumination of the dramatic clouds visible through the windows. However, rather than creating anxiety or pressure to conclude the event quickly, the storm seemed to be enhancing the sense of shared experience and common purpose among the gathered community. Catherine noticed that the children who had attended with their families were handling the unusual circumstances with remarkable grace and adaptability. Lucy Thompson had fallen asleep curled up on a comfortable chair, covered by her mother's jacket, while other children had created an impromptu play area using cushions from the castle's furniture. Their ability to find comfort and normalcy in unexpected circumstances reminded Catherine of the resilience that these families demonstrated daily in managing complex medical challenges. David Chen, the 8-year-old who had earlier commented on Catherine's messy hair, approached her again during a brief lull in conversations. This time, he was carrying a small notebook and pencil that his mother had given him to help pass the time during the extended gathering. "Princess Catherine," he said with the formality that his mother had clearly coached him to use, "I drew you a picture of today." He held up a crayon drawing that showed a stick figure with wild scribbled hair standing next to what was clearly meant to be Windsor Castle, with heavy diagonal lines representing the rain and dark scribbled clouds filling the sky. "This is beautiful, David," Catherine said, genuinely moved by the child's artistic interpretation of the day's events. "Can you tell me about your picture?" "That's you, arriving in the storm," David explained seriously. "Mommy said you came even though the weather was scary because you wanted to meet us. The rain made your hair crazy, but you smiled anyway. And that's the castle where we're safe and warm even though it's stormy outside." Catherine realized that David's simple drawing had captured something profound about the symbolic significance of the day that she was only beginning to fully understand herself. The image of persevering through the storm to reach a place of safety and connection resonated with the daily reality of every family dealing with serious childhood illness, navigating through frightening and unpredictable circumstances to find moments of security, hope, and community support. As she studied David's drawing, Catherine became aware that she was being photographed by one of the few media representatives who had remained throughout the extended event. The photographer, Rebecca Martinez, was someone Catherine had worked with many times before and who had developed a reputation for capturing authentic moments rather than just formal posed shots. Rebecca had been documenting the informal conversations and genuine interactions throughout the afternoon, creating a visual record of an event that had evolved far beyond its original parameters.
"Your Royal Highness," Rebecca said quietly, "I hope you don't mind my documenting these moments."
"This is unlike any royal event I've covered. The authenticity of the connections being made here is remarkable." Catherine nodded her permission, recognizing that Rebecca understood the significance of what was happening and would represent it respectfully. "I think it's important that people see how meaningful these conversations can be when we move beyond formal protocols and create space for genuine dialogue." As the evening continued, Catherine found herself reflecting on how this storm-interrupted gathering was revealing new possibilities for royal engagement and charitable work. The traditional model of royal patronage often involved ceremonial appearances, formal speeches, and carefully choreographed interactions that, while important for raising awareness and funds, sometimes felt disconnected from the daily realities of the causes being supported. Today's experience suggested that more informal, extended engagements could create opportunities for substantial impact beyond what was possible through traditional approaches. The conversations happening throughout the castle were generating new ideas, forging unexpected partnerships, and creating a sense of community among constituencies that rarely had opportunities to interact extensively. Dr. Harper approached Catherine during a brief, quiet moment. "I've been thinking about how we might capture and build upon what's happening here today," she said. "These conversations are producing insights and connections that could fundamentally change how we approach our work. What if we considered creating more opportunities for this kind of extended, informal dialogue?" Catherine was intrigued by the possibility. "What are you envisioning?" "Perhaps quarterly gatherings that bring together families, medical professionals, researchers, and policymakers in settings that encourage the kind of honest, productive conversations we're seeing tonight. Less formal presentation, more collaborative problem-solving." The storm forced us to abandon our usual script, and the results have been extraordinary. As Catherine considered Dr. Harper's suggestion, she realized that today's experience was challenging many of her assumptions about effective royal engagement. She had always understood the importance of showing up and demonstrating commitment, but she was learning that how she showed up, the level of authenticity, vulnerability, and genuine engagement she brought to her interactions, might be even more significant than simply fulfilling scheduled appearances. The storm continued to rage outside Windsor Castle, but inside the ancient walls, something transformative was taking place. The combination of challenging circumstances, extended time together, and suspended formal protocols had created conditions for the kind of meaningful dialogue and genuine connection that everyone involved would remember long after the weather had cleared. Catherine looked around the room at families, medical professionals, and Foundation board members who were still engaged in animated discussions despite the late hour and unusual circumstances. She realized that her decision to drive through the storm had led to far more than just keeping a commitment. It had created the possibility for authentic engagement that was changing everyone involved, including herself. As she watched David Chen showing his drawing to other children and listened to the ongoing conversations about healthcare innovation, family support systems, and policy reforms, Catherine understood that this stormy evening at Windsor Castle would be remembered not as an event that was disrupted by weather, but as a gathering that was transformed by the willingness of everyone involved to embrace unexpected circumstances and find new ways to connect with each other around shared values and common goals. As dawn broke over Windsor Castle the following morning, Catherine stood at the same tall windows where she had watched the storm rage throughout the previous evening. The transformation was remarkable. Where there had been driving rain and violent wind just hours before, there was now brilliant sunshine illuminating a landscape that had been washed clean and seemed to sparkle with renewed vitality. The contrast was so dramatic that it felt almost symbolic of the transformation that had occurred during the extended gathering. Several families had indeed remained overnight at Windsor Castle due to unsafe travel conditions, and Catherine had experienced something unprecedented in her royal career, an extended informal period where she could interact with the Foundation community without the usual time pressures and protocol constraints. The castle staff had arranged comfortable accommodations, and the evening had evolved into something resembling a very special house party, with deeply meaningful conversations continuing long into the night. Catherine had found herself sitting on the floor with children who couldn't sleep due to excitement about their unusual sleepover in a real castle, while parents and medical professionals continued their discussions in smaller groups throughout the historic rooms. She had helped prepare late-night snacks in the castle kitchen, participated in impromptu storytelling sessions, and witnessed the kind of genuine human connections that rarely occurred during formal royal engagements. Elizabeth Harper found Catherine at the window as the morning light continued to strengthen. Both women looked tired but energized, having participated in conversations that had continued until well past midnight. The extended time together had allowed for the kind of deep dialogue that usually required multiple meetings to achieve, and both were still processing the remarkable insights and connections that had emerged.
I've been thinking about yesterday, Dr. Bram.
Harper began, joining Catherine at the window. What started as a crisis management situation turned into the most productive Foundation gathering we've ever had. The conversations that happened here will influence our work for years to come. Catherine nodded, still absorbing the magnitude of what had occurred. I keep thinking about what Thomas Harrison said about the gap between medical innovation and practical implementation. Or Amanda Foster's insights about the emotional demands on nursing staff. These are perspectives that never emerge during formal presentations. The previous evening had produced several concrete outcomes that exceeded anything the original program might have achieved. Dr. Patricia Williams and the Thompson family had begun planning a pilot program for integrated family wellness support during pediatric cancer treatment. Thomas Harrison had agreed to collaborate with the Foundation's Technology Committee on developing better digital coordination tools for families managing complex medical cases. Amanda Foster had been invited to join the Foundation's advisory board to ensure that frontline healthcare worker perspectives were included in policy discussions. Most significantly, the families who had participated in the extended gathering had formed connections with each other that would provide ongoing mutual support. Catherine had watched parents exchange contact information, offered to share practical resources, and begin planning regular meetings that would continue long after they returned to their daily routines. The Foundation had always hoped to create community among the families it served, but the storm-enforced extended gathering had accomplished this goal more effectively than years of formal programming. James Morrison appeared with updates on travel conditions and departure logistics. The roads had been cleared overnight and all the families would be able to return home safely, though some were reluctant to leave given the meaningful connections they had formed. Several requested information about future opportunities for similar extended gatherings, suggesting that the storm-interrupted event had revealed an unmet need for more substantial engagement opportunities. "Ma'am," James reported, "the media coverage of yesterday's events has been extraordinary. The photographs of your arrival in the storm have been picked up internationally. But more importantly, the stories are focusing on the authentic connections that were created during the extended gathering. The Foundation has received more donation inquiries overnight than they typically receive in a month." Catherine was pleased about the positive media coverage and increased donor interest, but she was more excited about the substantive outcomes that had emerged from the meaningful conversations. The experience had demonstrated that authenticity and genuine engagement could produce results that far exceeded what was possible through traditional approaches to royal patronage. Rebecca Martinez, the photographer who had documented the extended gathering, approached Catherine with a selection of images from the previous day and evening. The photographs told a remarkable story of transformation. beginning with the dramatic arrival shots showing Catherine battling the storm, continuing through intimate moments of genuine conversation and connection, and concluding with families and medical professionals working together in ways that had clearly transcended their original formal relationships.
Your Royal Highness.
Rebecca said, "These images capture something I've never seen in royal coverage. The evolution from formal event to authentic community gathering is visible in the progression of photographs. People's faces, their body language, the way they're interacting, it all changes as the hours progress and the formal barriers dissolve." One photograph particularly moved Catherine. It showed her sitting on the castle floor with David Chen and several other children, all of them laughing at something while parents and medical professionals continued serious discussions in the background. Her hair was still disheveled from the storm. Her formal dress had been replaced by more casual attire borrowed from the castle staff, and her expression showed genuine joy rather than the careful composure typically required for royal appearances.
This image captures exactly what I hope people understand about royal engagement, Catherine told Rebecca.
It's not about maintaining perfect appearances or following rigid protocols. It's about showing up authentically and being genuinely present for the people and causes we serve. As families began to prepare for their departures, Catherine made a point of spending individual time with each group, but these conversations felt different from the usual formal royal farewells. Instead of polite expressions of gratitude and standard wishes for continued success, these exchanges involved specific commitments to ongoing collaboration, concrete plans for future meetings, and detailed discussions about how the insights gained during the extended gathering would be implemented. Margaret Chen, David's mother, approached Catherine with tears in her eyes. "Your Royal Highness, I need to thank you for showing David that princesses can have messy hair and still be beautiful, that important people sometimes get caught in storms like regular people, and that castles can be places where children are safe and valued. But mostly, I want to thank you for creating a space where parents like me could have real conversations with medical professionals who actually listened to our experiences and ideas." Catherine was deeply moved by Margaret's words, but she was also aware that the credit belonged to everyone who had participated in creating the extraordinary atmosphere of the extended gathering. Her decision to drive through the storm had initiated the sequence of events, but the remarkable outcomes had resulted from the willingness of families, medical professionals, and Foundation board members to embrace unexpected circumstances and engage authentically with each other. Dr. Michael Roberts, who had participated in several of the most productive conversations throughout the extended gathering, approached Catherine as he prepared to return to London. "Your Royal Highness, I've been working in pediatric medicine for over 2 decades, and I can honestly say that the discussions we had yesterday will influence how I approach patient care and family support for the rest of my career." The insights shared by parents and nursing staff have highlighted gaps in our approach that I had never fully appreciated. As the last families departed Windsor Castle, Catherine found herself alone with Dr. Harper and James Morrison, reflecting on the unprecedented nature of the experience they had all shared. The storm had initially seemed like a potential disaster that might disrupt or derail an important Foundation event. Instead, it had created the conditions for the most meaningful and productive royal engagement Catherine could remember. "I think we need to fundamentally reconsider how we approach Foundation events," Catherine said as they walked through the castle rooms where so many remarkable conversations had taken place. "Yesterday proved that when we create space for authentic dialogue and genuine connection, people respond with insights and commitment that far exceed what we achieve through traditional formal approaches." Dr. Harper was already developing plans for implementing the lessons learned during the storm gathering. "What if we designed our major events specifically to encourage the kind of extended, informal dialogue that happened yesterday? Instead of rushing through packed agendas with brief interaction opportunities, we could create longer gatherings that allow time for real relationships to develop and substantial conversations to occur." James Morrison, who had initially been concerned about the protocol and security implications of the extended gathering, had become convinced that the storm-interrupted event had demonstrated new possibilities for effective royal engagement. "The authenticity that emerged yesterday when normal protocols were suspended suggests that we might achieve better outcomes by being more flexible about how royal events are structured and managed." As Catherine prepared to return to London, she realised that her decision to drive through the storm had led to discoveries that would influence her approach to royal duties far beyond her Foundation work. The experience had demonstrated that authenticity, vulnerability, and genuine presence could produce results that exceeded what was possible through carefully managed formal appearances. The journey home took place under brilliant sunshine, with the countryside looking refreshed and beautiful after being cleansed by the previous day's intense storm. Catherine drove slowly, savoring the peaceful conditions while processing the significance of the experiences she had shared at Windsor Castle. The contrast between the challenging journey to the castle and the serene return trip seemed to mirror the transformation that had occurred during the extended gathering. As Kensington Palace came into view, Catherine understood that the storm-interrupted foundation event would be remembered as a turning point in her development as a royal representative. She had learned that sometimes the most powerful acts of leadership involved not controlling circumstances, but responding authentically to unexpected challenges and creating space for others to contribute their insights and experiences. The media coverage that followed would indeed focus on the dramatic images of Catherine arriving at Windsor Castle through the storm, but the lasting impact would come from the innovative approaches to royal engagement and charitable work that emerged from the extended gathering. The storm had forced everyone involved to abandon their usual scripts and expectations, creating possibilities for genuine connection and collaborative problem-solving that would influence the Foundation's work for years to come. Most importantly, Catherine had discovered that her role as a royal representative could involve not just ceremonial appearances and symbolic gestures, but also the creation of authentic spaces where people could engage meaningfully with each other around shared values and common goals. The storm had initially seemed like an obstacle to overcome, but it had ultimately provided the conditions for exactly the kind of substantive engagement that made royal patronage genuinely valuable rather than merely ceremonial. As she returned to her regular royal duties in the days that followed, Catherine carried with her the insights and inspiration gained during those stormy hours at Windsor Castle, along with a renewed commitment to approaching her role with the same authenticity and genuine presence that had made the Foundation gathering so remarkable. The storm had passed, but its impact on her understanding of effective royal engagement would last far longer than any weather system.